And now we'll turn to Judge Kingsley for his verdict.
Guilty.
Guilty as judged. Of course, you probably can get a pretty good idea of how the judge is going to find in a case where he's clapping from the bench for the prosecution witness. I want to explain my verdict, and I'm going to put a big number out, and it's all, you've already seen this number, 16 trillion. That's the total U.S. debt, but it also happens to be the total, what we call GDP. It's $16,000 billion. That's the total production of goods and services produced in the United States. And oftentimes, well, not often, how we ordinarily explain how much government spends and how much in comparison, so we can put this in some perspective, the United States spends about 24%, or what it spends is about 24% of GDP. Now, the reason I want to hold that for a minute, what I find in my finding is that we don't have a fiscal crisis, we have a moral crisis. And I'm going to get into that a little bit. If you look at the most vibrant economic systems in the world today, and you don't read about this in the U.S. press, or you don't hear much about it, but it's Norway, Finland, and Sweden. They're growing at about 3 to 4% GDP, or 3 to 4% per year. They spend about 40% in relation to their GDP, government. So they don't really have a huge problem with hungry children and homeless like we do in the United States. Now, I want to get specifically first into several vulnerable groups, and about everybody who doesn't have a really good job with good benefits that they can count on for their working life is a vulnerable person. But we do have people who are some who are a little more vulnerable than others. I want to start with the children. We have a program in the United States called TANF. Now, I was a social worker as a very young college graduate in Los Angeles, and at that time we had what were called categorical aid programs, one of which was aid to families with dependent children. In 1996, the Clinton administration, along with the Congress led by Newt Gingrich, decided to punish poor women and their children. And I call it punishment because they passed what was called the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Act, which was basically, now that in itself is an insult, you know. When the bankers got in trouble, we didn't call it the temporary aid to greedy bankers. We called it, I think the TAR program is temporary aid to, I don't know what it is. It's something, in other words, we're paying off the banks. But TAR, or TANF, stands for Temporary Aid to Needy Families, which is insulting. And by the way, the governor of Missouri about 6 months ago signed a bill that was passed in the legislature that all recipients of TANF in Missouri would have to pass a drug test. That's not only dehumanizing and cruel, it's just totally insane. Well, let's talk a little bit about TANF. Now, I mentioned that 16,000 billion. That's now our government total government budget is about 4 trillion, maybe a little less than 4 trillion, which is 4,000 billion. The TANF, the federal TANF budget is 17 billion. If you are a mother with a child in Missouri, your maximum cash allowance would be $234 a month. Now that's better than Mississippi, which is $120 a month. A mother and 2 children would be $292. Kansas, right now, I wouldn't expect this to last very long, is $352 a month for a mother and 1 child, and $429 for a mother and 2 children. Now, I know a couple of speakers already mentioned the F-35 Lockheed Martin contract to build this airplane that nobody really wants. It really thinks it's a very good idea, which by the time, by the way, according to the New York Times today, when that plane is finished, when we're all done with that contract, it will cost about $500 billion in total at this time, because there's cost overruns, the thing isn't working right, and so forth. I think the latest delivery of planes was a $3.25 billion delivery of, I think it was, I don't know, 20, 30 planes that they're delivering. When I was in Washington, I was in the metro. Lockheed Martin has ads on the metro walls to promote the F-35 jet fighter, which is totally unnecessary. So when we think of vulnerable citizens in our country, let me just say that right now about 24% of American children are in poverty, which means they're below the poverty level. But that really doesn't give you the right information, because African American children and Hispanic children is about 38% in poverty. And those, by the way, I have all of that documented with government documents that are with me tonight. Let's talk a little bit quickly about Medicare. That seems to be right now one of the political footballs that are kicking around. In that $4,000 billion that this government spends, about $550 billion is for Medicare. But only $224 billion is actually money that comes from what we call general revenue. That comes from income taxes. The other $224 billion comes from the beneficiaries. They pay it through their payroll tax, they pay it through their deductibles, their co-pays, and so forth. Now that $224 billion could be, as Mary pointed out, we don't negotiate drug prices. And Billy Tozen, who led the floor fight on that in Congress, immediately quit Congress and went to work for Big Pharma for about $3 million a year. So I mean, the corruption is just so palpable. It makes you wonder how people are not outraged. I think the last election indicated that people are outraged. So we could reduce that $224 billion probably in half pretty easy. That happens to be my bailiwick, is healthcare costs and looking at healthcare costs. And when you look at the device manufacturers like Medtronic and Johnson & Johnson, we're the only industrialized country in the world that does not have a database that maintains all implants, pacemakers, defibrillators, and so forth. So we don't know when they go bad. Now, why are we the only industrialized country in the world that doesn't have a database so we can track products that are going to be bad, and when a defibrillator goes bad, it's really a bad deal and a very costly one. We had 500,000 metal hips implanted before we realized the metal hip was a bad idea. We could have caught that much earlier. Now that was very, very expensive. When we were at the White House this summer, we had a chance to talk to President Obama's staff, and I asked Liz Fowler, who's his top aide for healthcare, why don't we have this database? And she kind of smiled and said, well, I really didn't expect that kind of a complicated question from you old folks coming in here to yell at us a little bit. So she was a little taken back by it, but really didn't have a good answer. You know, the SNAP program is about $78 billion that feeds people, but it's really not adequate. You know, you might get a couple $100s a month at the best. And that, by the way, both SNAP and TANF, when TANF was passed, it was all of those welfare funds were block granted to the states. And what's happening in so many states like Texas and Kansas, when a mother goes to the welfare office, she's not treated very well. And in other words, she's highly discouraged. Not only that, when TANF was passed, they said you only have 5 years total. And if you have to collect benefits for more than 5 years, that was federal law. States can do what they want. And many states, like Rhode Island and some other states, have reduced that to as many as 2 or 3 years before a mother can no longer get any benefits under TANF. So, you know, what we do is we're driving people into homelessness and into the streets and so forth. The best testimony I saw on hungry children, believe it or not, was on 60 Minutes when Scott Pelley interviewed about 20 little kids who were homeless with their families. And he asked them what it was like to go to bed hungry at night. And if you could go back and find that, and they've shown this again on 60 Minutes, it's very, very hard to watch. So and I want to say this about the fiscal cliff and Social Security real quickly. I'll not go on and on here, I could do that. You know, one of the things that Senator Bernie Sanders, my hero, keeps asking the Senate to do is take the cap off. Right now, the payroll taxes stop at $113,000. I don't know about you in this audience, I never made it. But if you are one of the you know, CEOs that's making $3, $4, $5 million, your deductions stop, your payroll taxes stop at $113,000, which makes Social Security a very regressive tax. And if we took that cap off, Social Security is not an issue. It shouldn't be an issue now, and it's not really a problem because we have about $2.4 trillion in the trust fund that's going to carry that trust and carry beneficiaries to about 2033 if we could project that far into the future. But take that cap off. We could do that. So we really have, and in conclusion, as a judge, I would say, you know, what we really have to look at here is what kind of a civilization are we? What are our values and morals? Is it to let Betty struggle with her $10 in food stamps to find food, that her children have to help her? Do we have to rob our citizens of their dignity? Now, you know, if you just look at Bloomberg Markets magazine last week, the 100 wealthiest people in the world include about 4 Walmart heirs. They're about 8, 9, 10, and 11 on the 100. And together they have $116 billion in assets, which is more than the bottom 40% of the rest of the population of the United States. Now, their assets, every one of them had an increase of $5 billion last year in assets. So they're doing quite well. I don't want to jump into Professor Carbone's area, but let me say that the Walmart heirs swing a lot of weight on the Walmart board. And they convinced Walmart to to issue dividends in December this year because they thought Obama might be able to swing a deal where we could up those taxes on dividends to 20%. By getting them to issue those dividends in December, the Walmart heirs made about $179 million by paying 15% on their taxes, while you go to work and pay 20% or more on your taxes. So, you know, a vibrant, healthy economic system has to have a very good moral, ethical value basis, and that's what we really don't have right now. We've had about 4 decades of testing Milton Friedman's crackpot pseudo-theories about the free market, which is about as real as a unicorn. So I think it's time for us to wake up and realize that this is very wrong, and so my verdict is guilty.